I don't even know how to start. Maybe because of the night when everything took a different turn. It was a Friday, and I was feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. You know that feeling of carrying the weight of an entire week, but finally feeling welcomed by the peace of home? The atmosphere was peaceful, almost like a comforting emptiness. Pedro had already gone up to the bedroom, and I could finally relax. It was just me, the sofa and the soft sound of the clock on the wall. I threw myself there, looking at the ceiling, feeling my body finally loosen up. It was at that moment, in that deep silence, that something inside me began to change. But I had no idea how much that night would still be memorable. It all started there. And, honestly, what happened next still makes me wonder how I got here. To understand, you need to know a little about my story with Pedro. It's been 8 years since we separated. 8 years of trying to take on 2 roles at the same time. At first, it was like carrying a baggage that never got any smaller, but Pedro was always by my side. Ever since he was little, he seemed to have a maturity that no child should need to have. We created such a strong connection that it was like we were an inseparable duo, you know? Just the 2 of us, facing whatever life threw at us. Everything I did was for him. Keeping the bills paid, putting food on the table, offering emotional support. He was the center of everything. But, as complicated as it was, I knew that he also did everything thinking of me. Pedro didn't just grow up by my side. He grew up for me. And that's one of those things that, at the same time, fills me with pride and breaks my heart. Today he's almost 20 years old. He's no longer the boy who ran to hug me when I got home from work. He's become a man. But sometimes, when I look at him, I feel like he was forced to grow up too quickly. Pedro is selfless, the kind who always puts others before himself. But I know he carries a heavy load. The difficulties we faced left their mark on him, as if every responsibility I couldn't handle had been transferred to him. I always wanted to protect him from everything, but deep down, there were so many times when he was the one who protected me. This is clear in the way he looks at me, a look full of understanding, but also full of tiredness. I was there, almost surrendering to rest. That kind of silence that only exists when the house is completely quiet at night. That's when I heard a sound at the door. At first, I thought it was just in my head, but I heard it again, a little more clearly. It was Pedro. He was standing there, with an expression that only a mother can interpret. It wasn't just fatigue. It was something deeper, something he couldn't or wouldn't put into words. Despite his adult demeanor, at that moment he seemed like a disoriented child. "I can't sleep," he said softly, almost like a whisper. And I knew immediately that the problem wasn't just lack of sleep. It was the weight of something bigger. I did what any mother would do. I lifted the covers and said, "Lie down here." He hesitated for a moment, as if he were trying to fight some sense of pride or discomfort, but eventually he sat down on the edge of the bed. When he finally did, I could feel how vulnerable he was. His shoulders were tense, as if they were carrying a huge burden. I wanted to break the silence, ask him what was going through his mind, but I decided to wait. Sometimes, all someone needs is a safe place. Pedro avoided looking at me, staring at the ceiling, as if he were lost in distant thoughts. Something inside me told me that he was about to share something important, something that needed time to be said. "Can I tell you something? But promise to listen to me until the end, okay?" His voice cut through the silence, full of hesitation. The air seemed heavier, as if each word he said carried an invisible weight. He slid his hand down my arm, slowly, almost as if he were searching for a missing link. My body reacted before I could even process it, shivering at the touch, as if it awakened something that had been dormant for a long time. Do you still miss him? The question was low, almost a whisper, but full of meaning. I was taken by surprise. It was the last thing I expected to hear. Before I could answer, he continued, his voice even more intense. If I had acted differently, do you think things would have ended differently? My heart raced, but it wasn't because I missed him or remembered my ex. It was because of Pedro. He wasn't talking about the past in general. He was talking about us. About what was left after my divorce, as if he carried the blame for something that should never have been his responsibility. The pain in his eyes broke me. I wanted to say no, that he was never the problem. But the guilt he seemed to carry was so great that no words seemed enough. And it was at that moment that I realized, what had once been just comfort, just companionship, had transformed into something I could no longer ignore. It was in the embrace that everything changed. Or maybe it was the moment I stopped resisting the inevitable. The room was shrouded in soft shadows, lit only by the dim light of the lamp beside it. As he pulled me closer, the heat of his body melted into mine. It wasn't just a touch. It was something that broke through any doubt, any barrier. His scent, the weight of his arms around me, it all felt so right and wrong, yet impossible to avoid. When our eyes met, there was something undeniable. An intensity that seemed to have waited years to be released. And then it happened. First, a kiss. Slow, but filled with a hunger that had been contained for too long. His hands roamed my skin, as if he wanted to capture every detail. I let myself go, without reservations. In that moment, there were no rules, only the overwhelming desire that filled the space between us. Our bodies moved in perfect harmony, as if they were communicating in a language that only the two of us understood. The room echoed with our panting breaths, each touch igniting an even more intense passion. We made love as if the outside world didn't matter, as if only the two of us existed. When morning came, the sunlight streaming through the window seemed to mock the confusion that dominated my mind. Sitting at the table, with the coffee maker hissing in the background, I tried to pretend that everything was normal. But nothing was. Every gesture Pedro made, the way he ran his hand through his hair, the way he held the cup, brought back vivid memories of the night before. I didn't know what it meant, or what would happen from then on. I only knew that something inside me had changed forever. And deep down, the desire to relive everything we had shared burned brighter than any logic or fear. During breakfast, there was something different in the air. Pedro's eyes met mine in a way that seemed to linger longer than usual, as if he were trying to tell me something that words couldn't express. It wasn't just a casual glance. There was an intensity, a quiet weight that went beyond that. He was more reserved than usual, but his emotions spilled out in every movement, in the way he absently fiddled with his spoon, in the hesitant smile that appeared whenever our eyes met. Later, as we watched a movie in the living room, the tension between us felt almost palpable. He was sitting next to me on the couch, but the space between us felt too small to contain everything we were feeling. When our fingers touched, it was as if time had frozen. His hand held mine, and in that moment, a silent, intense connection filled the room. No words were needed. The desire was clear, uncontainable. Before we could think, the proximity between us increased, and once again, we let ourselves be carried away by that overwhelming passion that seemed greater than any logic or reason. We made love again, this time with even more intensity, as if we were reaffirming something we already knew, even without admitting it. This was inevitable. When everything calmed down, Pedro looked at me with a depth that disarmed any resistance. He held my face with his hands, his eyes filled with a feeling that I still didn't know how to describe. "You have no idea how much your presence means to me." His words hit me like a wave. It wasn't just desire. It was something more. Something so deep that it began to blur the boundaries that I believed were unbreakable. I felt vulnerable, exposed, but also connected in a way that seemed impossible to ignore. What was happening between us was no longer something we could pretend didn't exist. Every touch, every look, every long conversation on silent nights pushed us into an unfamiliar place, where the roles that had once defined our relationship no longer made sense. It was intimate. It was deep. And, above all, it was undeniable. On a rainy night, with the sound of water hitting the roof and the fire in the fireplace casting soft shadows across the room, we were alone again. The silence was comfortable, but charged with everything that had yet to be said. Pedro broke the distance, coming closer, his eyes shining in the light of the flames. I need you to know. I love you. Not only for who you are, but for everything you awaken in me. Those words took me by surprise, but at the same time, they were exactly what I needed to hear. He had put into words what we were experiencing. It wasn't just a physical connection. It was something that transcended, something neither of us had planned. When the rain outside stopped, we hugged. Inside us, a storm of emotions finally found calm. There was no more resistance, no room for doubts or fears. We were together completely, crossing a threshold that redefined who we were to each other. When I looked at Pedro, I knew there was no turning back. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. On the contrary, it was comforting. It was the beginning of something new, something profound, that connected us in a way that no one else could understand. Did you like this story? Then leave a comment telling us what you thought, and, if you've experienced something similar, share it with us. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any new content. Here, we bring exciting stories, reflections, and real experiences, always with great authenticity. Thank you for being with us until the end. See you in the next video.